Okay, so we had a discussion at the end of yesterday about the difference between thoughts and between written words. The thoughts tend to dissipate; they tend to disappear if you don't write them down. That's called the srafim omdim imalo. That
The thoughts are more ruchni, right?
they're fleeting. They're more fleeting. It's hard to keep them alive without putting them to writing. Anyway, so that was the idea that this all had to do with the idea that that all the mitzvos have pnimius and chitzonius. They all have pnimius and makif. They have an inner aspect, which is the intent, and the part that's integrated, and they have an external aspect, which is the makif.
Why is it so hard to translate your thoughts? You can have great ideas and great thoughts, right? And you really want to do it, but it's hard to transfer it from the realm of thought to the realm of action. What's the problem?
So that's called Maseh Mokavatz, what we said yesterday. That's the workings of the chariot. You have to fuse them together. You have to fuse it. A thought that's not fused into action right away, it dissipates. That's why you told me about that.
Yeah. So
About what your son does in Oyuda.
Yeah.
Right?
You got a great idea, a great thought, you suddenly become inspired,
Right.
so now you do something.
So it's a seraph. It's a burning fury angel that disappears after a few seconds.
What happens to it if you give tzedakah and mechaber? What does it do? It goes to the
So that gives it the vessel, the writing, as it were, that keeps it in this world.
So where is that then?
Once you do an act, then you have more connection to it.
Okay, now it's preserved, but you haven't actually gone to do the actual idea. You've done
No, but you have the idea. First of all, it could be that you already did part of the idea, but now you have the idea preserved. So now you have to think about it. So, like for instance,
where is it preserved? Where is it?
Well, in your mind, first of all. No, it remains in your mind. It doesn't dissipate right away. So, for instance, your idea about doing a mitzvah to call people up on Erev Shabbos.
Yeah.
So for me, it didn't disappear. Why did it not disappear? Because I had to try to make contact with Mr. Dukes in order to talk to him about it.
Okay.
I don't know about you.
Never answered me. But I found more people to talk to.
Okay. So So
One
for
of
me,
one of the guys in the work in Tel Aviv, we phone each other every Shabbos. How are you, good Shabbos? You know, the hello, how are you, good Shabbos is saying good Shabbos makes you aware that the Shabbos is coming. So
right. So for me, that remained because I did something. But if you would have just told me your great idea and I wouldn't have done anything with it, it probably would have burned in my brain and disappeared.
But are you phoning people every Shabbos?
Not yet. Except for my mother, I don't do anything.
What do you accept for your mother?
We're talking about 150 people each person, so it's going to take a little bit. Anyway, let's continue a little.
Yeah.
Okay. So all this leads us into the next point.
29?
We're at the end of 29. וגם מבחינת מקיף, שהוא כעניין שנאמר ויצא כברק חיצו, שאינו אלא כברק המבריק במוחו והשגתו, ואינו נתפס ונקלט לתוך השגתו ממש. So, again, the point is that whatever you're thinking about is like lightning. It's a lightning strike. And it's not retained. For a moment, you have illumination, and then it's gone.
So what's wrong with having a bad thought? If a thought just disappears, why are we so, determined never to have bad thoughts? When it's thought, it didn't really mean it, so why isn't that dissipated?
There's two different types of thought. There's thought that comes from above and thought that comes from below.
Okay.
These thoughts, these good thoughts, dissipate quickly.
Yeah.
They don't really come from the heart. They come from an idea.
Okay.
But when we say that a negative thought is worse than an act, what we mean to say is that these negative thoughts, they're like an ebb and a flow that comes out of the heart, like from the unconscious, and it proves to you where you're really situated. So they tell you that listen, this is not just a one time. It's not an act. Yeah. It's worse because it's already that your heart is already there, and that's why you're suddenly thinking of these things.
So the Baal Shem Tov says the way you think you are, that's where you are.
That was about good things.
Right.
Here we're talking about. You're not thinking about. It's called hirhur avera. Hirhur The literal translation would be a mountain within a mountain. Hiruhur is like a peak within a peak. So what's peaking? What's peeking out when you have this negative thought? It's really your heart. That's why the Alter Rebbe says in the Tanya that if you have negative thoughts while you're davening, push them away. He doesn't say rectify them. He says why? Because these types of thoughts that come up when you are trying to concentrate on something holy, they are a reaction to the holiness. And that reaction is not that you're picking up some hidden thoughts from somebody else, the way that the Baal Shem Tov taught it. They're all your own. They're the opposite force against the holiness that you're trying to foster. Mm-hmm. And so the result is that you should try to ignore it, because it's you, it's all you. So those types of thoughts, they're worse than an act. But these thoughts, they don't come from you in the sense that your heart is just filled with love of God, and therefore you thought of this great idea. This great idea came from beyond. It is something. Again, somebody might argue, no. It's just it's my heart peeking out in a good way. But unfortunately, if you're a little bit truthful to yourself, you see that that's not the case. It's not my heart thinking all day long about how to do good to other people. I had this idea once in a while, something comes, and it comes from the outside. Okay, so that's a hiruhur avera. It's not a machshava. Machshava is something else. וגם מבחינת מקיף שהוא קניין של... אוקיי. וזהו עניין לבושי הנשמה של גן עדן, להיות צרורה בצרור החיים, כבוד השם יאסיפך. דהיינו להיות האור אינסוף ברוך הוא מקיף עליו ומלבישו וסובבו מכל צד, עד שיהיה נכלל באור אינסוף ברוך הוא, ממש מבחינת ביטול ההשגה. And that is the state in which the soul is in Gan Eden, where, again, it's surrounded by the infinite light of Hashem. It's enclosed by it in such a way that it's like nullified within it. This is a tremendous description of what it means to be in Gan Eden. That you're so engrossed in the holiness that you have no feeling of separate self. There's nothing there. There's nothing like that. It's the same way. Why is it? Somebody asked a little while ago, how we should understand the phrase "Tiyeh nefesh adoni tzrura b'tzror chaim." What he mentions here. That I can't remember who it was who said to David, "May the soul of my master be included, entwined in the tzror of life." I don't know how to say it. No, tzror, it's the same word. It's entwined in the twine of life. So that's how you would have to say it. It's very hard to translate this verse. But the image that it's bringing up is the same way that David took 5 stones. Right? He collected 5 stones when he was going to fight Goliath. And the 5 stones fused into one. What's the idea? The idea is that the separation between them was gone. The putting them together, gathering like pebbles together, and putting them into a sack together, and then when the sack is closed, you can't tell the separation between them if it's closed. Really, it's like one stone. It says that's what happens to the soul in the Garden of Eden. It has no sense of self because it's so engrossed and so entwined and so encircled and surrounded by God's infinite light that there's no sense of self left. That can only be in this world. It's only when the soul comes down here, and here you have the body separating, right? Then it's like opening the sack and taking out pebble by pebble. So then each pebble has its own separate existence. But in that sack, they all become one. It's like they're all just one thing. So that's called bitul hasaga. That's the end of comprehension. You can't comprehend Hashem. וזהו עניין נחום, וזהו שאומר, כבוד השם יאסיפך אחר כי תראה ערום וכסיתו, שהוא בחינת מקיף ולבוש, וזהו עניין כבוד, שהוא עניין מקיף, כמו שנדבר במקום אחר. This is what it means, that the honor of Hashem will gather you right after it says that you will see a poor man who has no clothing and you will cover him, you'll give him a garment. In the same way that you gave him a garment, Hashem is going to give you a garment.
Uh-huh.
And what's the garment that he gives you? Again, this is what's called kavod, right? The kavod is like Rabbi Yochanan called his garments my honors, the things that honor me, my kavod, my honor.
We're against COVID.
We don't walk around naked. We're against the honor that makes a person separate. That honor is false. Meaning, if the honor is coming from you being separate, so that leads to all manners of self-consciousness and to what we call image of self, and all these terrible things that take a person out of the world because they convince him that he's an island unto himself.
He's a
Island unto himself. Yeah. That's the story of the modern world. That somewhere in the 1600s, 1700s, the world fell apart, or at least it started to, and people began to be independent, as it were, or at least they thought they were. And slowly, because of that, there was the rise of identity, of who am I, of the self-image. And there wasn't a good remedy for it, meaning that somebody like Kennedy gave one of the possible remedies. He said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So that's at least putting it in some kind of context. It's saying, how do I define myself? I define myself in terms of what I can do for the general good. But the moment that the person defines himself, both has a self and defines that self in terms of how is he different than everybody else, and how is he just as important as everybody else, and so on and so forth. And again, it's just as important as a euphemism. Really what it means is more important, because obviously you're closer to yourself than you are to other people, so you really are going to look out for your honor more than you're going to look out for anybody else's. So that leads to the destruction of society. It's really what it does. So he's saying here that performing mitzvos is a remedy to that. It engulfs you, it engrosses you, again, it surrounds you in the feeling that you are not an island unto yourself. You can't look at yourself that way. And that, by the way, is the remedy that the Rebbe spoke about copiously regarding, for instance, American politics. Same thing. He said, after a president is elected, he shouldn't be a Democrat or a Republican. He should be serving the greater good. He shouldn't be...
That's what they all say. It doesn't matter who voted for me. I'm everybody's president.
They say that, right? But he said they actually should. But he gave them a way to do it. You can't just... and the way you do it is by mitzvahs. So in terms of a president, that means that he has duties that he needs to perform. And if he would really perform those duties and not deal with the politics, then he could be the president of everybody. I think that mostly they're able to. Trump was in that respect one of the worst presidents, because he really saw it as contrarian, like whatever the Democrats want is automatically wrong, and he had an inability to see the needs of the many. He was very, very focused just on his partisan view. On the other hand, he was the first president ever to say, even before he started, I'm not tied to my party. So it's a complex picture. Are you partisan, not partisan? In the end, somebody would say Trump was just for Trump. That's why he didn't care whether The question is, was he able to really put everything aside? But that's what mitzvahs do. That's the goal of a mitzvah. A mitzvah is meant to provide you with a way to not lose yourself inside yourself, meaning to bring you out, to connect you to the rest of the world. Everywhere the sages talk about this, they talk about a person whose da'at is me'orevet ba'briot, whose consciousness is engaged, it's mixed up in the rest of the humanity around him. He's not living on an island by himself.
That's good.
Okay. On the other hand, you don't have to go overboard, right? And somebody wrote a couple of days ago, the Rav Steinsaltz was always very engaged in what was going on. On the other hand, he never took it hard. So even though he was very involved in or aware of what Mishigas, the politicians, were doing now, and whatever they were doing at the time, he never let it get the better of him, and he never lost sight of the bigger picture, which is that we're all Jews. It's a tough thing to do. So.
The head is in the body; it's separate from the rest of the body in the sense that it's not covered by the clothes. It's the leader, one person. It doesn't necessarily disassociate itself from the rest of his body, so it has to be a balance.
Our politicians are not the head. Our politicians are hardly the toes. It's the tail wagging the dog. It's the other way around. We're not talking about people like that. People who are great, like real luminaries. So then they're the head, and you cover the head with something else. But the head is still connected to the body. He's not going anywhere without the body. Okay. וגילוי זה נמשך גם כן למטה בנפש האדם להיות בחינת באר הנובעת ממטה למעלה. And now he says, וזהו עניין מעיין גנים, שכנסת, this was the most important part, שכנסת ישראל היא בחינת מעיין המשקיע את הגנים להיות המשכת תענוג עליון מאור אינסוף ברוך הוא, מהעלם אל הגילוי בגן עדן עליון ובגן עדן תחתון. So, the congregation of Israel, the source of all the souls, as we said, is like a spring that's watering the gardens. So now you have a very interesting thing, that the gardens are actually the souls. Okay. That's what he's saying. That each one of us is a different level. What?
It's more than one.
Yeah, of course. And so, it says that after you pass away, that each soul goes to its level of Gan Eden. But it's the same thing when you're alive. That each person has a different capability of taking pleasure in godliness. So each person is living in a different Garden of Eden, as it were. And in that Garden of Eden, that's where he's working. That's where he's tilling and taking care of the garden. So it's a very interesting thing, that garden is a euphemism for soul. And Bati Lagani, for instance, is I'm coming to my soul. And God wants to reveal himself in the soul. So the spring above, meaning the source, here we would say something simple. He doesn't say it here, but one way of thinking of this is that Moshe Rabbeinu talks, that's the spring from above. That's the spring watering the gardens. Each person, what he hears, that's his personal garden. But when Moshe Rabbeinu talks, it's like it was said about the Baal Shem Tov, that when he spoke, each person understood what was relevant to them. And he spoke. It was as if he spoke many languages at once. And it's really, you see that when somebody who's very connected, up above, teaches, and you go around the room and ask the people that were listening, what did you hear? So each one will give a different message. Like each one hears what they need to hear. It's not, we'll get to this in a moment, maybe not today, but later on he talks about this difference between how Torah is taught and how everything else is taught. But in short, everything else is very clear. You say one thing, you say what you mean. Why is it easier to read a scientific book than it is to read anything in Torah? Because the scientific book has to be clear and direct. And it has to have only one meaning. If you're duplicitous in some way, or you have multiple meanings, so the editor will tell you, rewrite this, because I don't understand which side you're taking. Tell me what you think. And you have to make it very grounded. But Torah, it's Edu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. It's always complex. There's always a complex message. Why? Because Torah reflects the true nature of the soul, which is much more complex than the nature of reality. Reality is very simple. physical reality, right? This is either a solid table or it's air. There's no two ways.
It's not reality. The real reality is Gan Eden. The real reality is doing Torah and Mitzvahs.
But again, we live here. And here, it's easier to read anything that was written as a scientific work or a non-fiction work or anything that's just clear thinking than it is to read anything in Torah. Because Torah always gives you both perspectives, at least two perspectives. And you're switching between them. That's what it means, that when somebody who's connected to the spring above, to the wellspring above, when he speaks, every person hears something else. Because he's taking it from the source that is the source of everything. Source of all the souls. So it fits each one of the souls in its special way. But in any case, what he's trying to say here is that there above, it's a revelation from being concealed to being revealed. But then it comes down into our soul. What does it mean? We're being enlivened by the prophecies of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're being enlivened by the prophecies in the Bible. But that's not yet life. That's life force, but it's not life. Life is when it hits the person down here. And when it hits the person down here, it becomes something else. And that's what we talked about first time. The first time we started learning this, that the soul is not just what comes from above to below to enliven me, but the soul is also what comes from below to above, what spreads in this world as the result of my actions. In other words, I take the abstract concepts that are in the Torah and I turn them into practical actions. And that is a whole different, it's a complementary motion. If the prophecy was coming from above to below, it's the water flowing down, then what I would do with it in my life, that's the water flowing from below. That's the spring from below. So there's a spring from above and a spring from below. Spring from above is what's coming from the congregation of Israel, from the totality of all souls. The spring from below depends on my actions. But if I take this inspiration that I've received and I think about how do I apply it, how do I make it into something practical, then that will, he is going to explain, is the act of digging a well and allowing the waters to flow up. Meaning they came from above, they permeated, they percolated through me, and whether they will, from me, they will now expand out. Yafutzu ma'enotecha chutza. That your well springs. Why two well springs? What should the Mashiach have said to the Baal Shem Tov? Your wellspring should burst forth or extend out. Why does he say your well springs? Because he's talking about Ma'ayan Ganim, the Ma'ayan above and the Ma'ayan below. So it's not enough for you just to see above. You also have to have the water flowing below.
Your own private Gan Eden is expanding all the time
and affecting other people, right? That's exactly it. One way of saying it is that the Mashiach is the person who's happiest, but he's, how do you say it? Medabik.
A leper sitting on the outskirts.
No. He's a medabik. How do you say medabik? Contagious. His happiness is contagious.
Oh.
You see what I mean? It's not enough that he's connected above. It's very nice. He's connected above. He's receiving from above. The question is it permeating his soul and then coming out to water everything around him? Is it giving life around him? So in every aspect he's going to be that way. The most important aspect, because he's Mashiach, and it's Otiyot Yisamach. Yismach or Yisamach. Yismach means that he's happy. He's full of joy. And Yisamach means that he gives joy to everybody around him. So that's why the Mashiach said to the Baal Shem Tov, when your wellspring spread forth. Because there's two well springs. There's one that comes from above to below, but there's also one that comes from below to above. And that's the one he's talking about now. וגילוי זה נמשך גם כן למטה מנפש האדם, להיות בחינת באר הנובעת ממטה למעלה. That's the wellspring from below. The moment that the wellspring from above is revealed inside the person, then it's called the well from below. בקיום מה שכתוב, ואהבת את השם אלוקיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך, כמו שכתוב, לך השם נפשי עשה. And this is all related to a feeling that I'm yearning for God from here below. כי אתה וראתה ואתה יצרת ואתה עתיד לתלה ממני, ואינה נתונה לאדם אלא כדי שהוא ימי חייו. Because the understanding then is that the amount of time that I have to enjoy this soul should be spent making something with it. לזאת יהיה בעיניו כל ימי חיי העולם הזה בחינת על כורחך אתה חי. Meaning, I'm not here for my pleasure, for my benefit. I'm here to fulfill the needs of my soul. That's called, I'm being coerced to live, as it were. This is a very Chabad concept, right? A lot of people today can't connect to this. They don't understand what this means. What does it mean that you're on duty? It's a very difficult concept to understand. But the truth is, it's not just a Chabad.
He didn't give anybody any rest.
Okay. First of all, he didn't give himself. But the truth is that anybody who's in a state of doing, who's serious about life, feels that it's a duty. People take breaks, they take vacations, they do this, they do that. But the people that are serious in this world are always in a state of being on duty. They're not here to. Again, it's like you're feeling this is temporary. There's a job to be done. You're gonna do the job. Maybe you take vacations once in a while. You do this, you do that, but in the end, it's constantly a feeling of being on duty. Okay? That's called al kochacha tachai. Ucheman deshado b'tai katfoi. And the way he treats the material needs is like he gives them. He doesn't pay attention to them. He just feeds them. If I need to eat, I'll eat. If I need to sleep, I'll sleep. But I'm on duty, so it's not the most important thing for me. I just do it kilachar yad. That's what it's called. It's like tossing it behind my back, feeding a dog by tossing it behind my back. I don't need to look at you. I don't need to pay attention to you. You'll get along. My real yearning is to God. וכל ימי חיי האדם אשר נתלבשה נפשו בגופו בעולם הזה הוא רק כדי להיות בחינת באר שנובעת מתחת לארץ דייקה. And the whole reason that my soul came down into this body, why didn't it stay in Gan Eden? Why did it not stay in the Garden of Eden? Because it's meant to be a wellspring here below. It's meant to affect here below. שנובע מתחת לארץ דייקה. A wellspring that comes from underground. And underground, again, is that these teachings percolated into my reality, into my ground, and now, through the acts that he'll describe in chapter 2, they've sprung up as a wellspring. That's a very important point. The water that comes down from the source of the soul in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, is drinkable, but it's not pure. Very interesting thing. It's like rainwater. Rainwater is good, but it's not clean. It's never really clean. People think it's like such a big find. It's not such a big find. It's full of dirt. It has to, because it just went through the whole atmosphere and it picked up. But the amazing thing is that when the water goes through the earth, it becomes purified in a way that, it's 100 times more pure than rainwater. How is that possible? It just went through dirt itself. It says that is a tremendous mashal, it's a tremendous parable to understand why the difficulties of life purify the soul. In the same way, even though the soul when it came down was very pure and very good, but it came down because it knows it's going to become more pure. By going through life, by applying the knowledge that it has from above in a practical way here below, by doing a mitzvah, whatever it does, and it's just getting through life even. Okay? It's purified. And it becomes more suitable. Okay. So the Ma'im Rabim is the difficulties of life. Okay? Here, the parable for the difficulties of life is having to go percolating through the earth and becoming purified by the difficulty of getting through the earth, getting through mundane life. So they become clearer and more pure, the waters. ככה נשמה מתבררת יותר. In the same way, the soul is clarified, it's purified. בקיום התורה מצוות מעשיות שבעניינים גשמיים. By doing mitzvahs, by doing actual physical hard work. וגם על ידי תגבורת כוח הנפש האלוקית על הנפש הבהמית. And also when the soul exercises its power to overcome the animal soul. This also purifies the soul. להקפיה ולהפכה חשוכה לנהורה. To submit and transform the darkness into light. As it says in the introduction to the Zohar. Here he has another thing. This is a source I don't remember. In part 2 of the Zohar, 128b. You need to look at that. ואילה זאת חומיות הגוף וגשמיות העולם הזה אינו אלא בחינת מעבר לנשמה ועיקר דבקותה תהיה בשורשה באלוקים חיים. So the physical existence of the body and of this world are like something that the soul passes through in order to cling back to God. But again, the clinging back to God is that you pass through the mundane with the goal of having a well spring out and everything being distributed around you. And all your treasures being distributed, all your water, all your soul being distributed around you. So there's a lot more here. We'll skip the whole Haggah here. Okay, it's a very interesting thing. But just to mention that he says there are two words, Ma'yan and Be'er. A Ma'yan is a naturally occurring spring. The water just comes out. A Be'er is a well, you have to dig it. So you have a spring and you have a well. The spring is from above. That's like a natural flow. You don't have to do anything for that to come down. We didn't need to do anything to receive the Torah. Hashem gave it to us. We didn't have to, as they say, Lo me'ever layam hi, lo b'shamayim hi, lo me'ever layam. You don't have to climb up to the heavens. You don't have to go across the seas. It's here. Hashem gave it. Vayered Hashem al Sinai. Hashem came down. So you don't have to do anything. What do you have to do? You have to dig a well. So for the downflow of the water, the downflow of the soul's energy, you don't have to do anything. That happens by itself. But for the upflow, for the water coming out from you, for the soul affecting everything that's around you, that you need to dig a well. And that's going to be the topic of the next chapter.
Okay, when are we going to learn tomorrow?
I don't know, what time? You tell me.
Anytime from 3.